And I now have the great pleasure to introduce to you Senator Sam Brownback. Senator Brownback of Kansas, born in a small agricultural town, Parker, and now, for the last 8 years, the Senate representative for the state of Kansas. But his interests are not just Kansas. His interests are the defense of the vulnerable, the unborn, the persecuted throughout this world. And in his chairmanship of the subcommittee of the Senate, which looks at our foreign relations with Korea, with China, with Japan, Senator Brownback has shown knowledge and commitment to the people of Korea. The Korea Freedom Act is his bill. He introduced it, he led it into law. The Korean broadcasting is his idea and his leadership to carry through. He has shown commitment to the people of Korea and to those who suffer still in the camps and prisons of North Korea. And Senator Brownback has gone beyond Korea. He is the chairman of an organization known as the U.S. Helsinki Commission, which was created 30 years ago to bring about closer cooperation in Europe between the former Soviet Union and the NATO allies. And in his leadership of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, he has held hearings on the rebellion or revolution in Kyrgyzstan, the causes of revolt in Uzbekistan, the Roma, the Gypsies in Russia, and in our own country, he has looked at the trafficking in women in America. This is a man of both moral clarity and extraordinary courage. He is a man who's willing to take on the soft thinkers, those who find an easy way out. This guy's tough. This guy says, I will confront the appeasers. I will confront them with Christian commitment to love my neighbor. And so I have great pleasure in introducing Sam Brownback.
Apparently kind. Thank you very much, Ms. Negroponte. Thank you very much, Ms. Negroponte. What a great pleasure and what a great lady. Let's give her a round of applause, Ms. Negroponte. Thank you. And thank you for all your commitment. Her husband has served in a number of jobs for the United States government, and she has as well in a various set of positions and things she's done. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all of you being here today. We're here about freeing people in North Korea. We're here to talk about freeing people in North Korea and what needs to take place. And people should be free everywhere in the world, including and especially in North Korea. Agree? That needs to take place. And many of you have been long-time people advocating and working and praying for the freedom of the individuals in North Korea, and it's important that we do that. It's important that we confront this issue and that not be set to the side. That the discussion of human rights for North Koreans is a front and center issue, not a sidebar issue. That it's one that should be part of the six-party talks. It's one that should be front and center and not shuffled to the side. And we'll hear today from a perspective of an individual who was involved in earlier talks against an earlier regime where it was important that human rights was a front and center issue to be discussed. Before we get to the panel, though, I want to recognize some of the individuals in the audience. And number one of those I would like to recognize and have stand and have you recognize any and everybody in this audience who was in North Korea and has left that country. I would like to invite you to stand that we could recognize you, individuals that were in North Korea and defected from that country. gentleman here, over here. That takes extraordinary courage and commitment to do that. I was on the Chinese-North Korean border a couple of years ago, and it is a very difficult situation for North Koreans that are there. You're going to hear from an individual that was in one of the gulags in North Korea today. I met him several years back before he was famous and met President Bush. I had read his book, The Aquariums of Pyongyang, before the president didn't get near the stir. But when the President of the United States read the book, people started taking notice. I would commend it to everybody. It is an incredible book. You also have one of the longtime advocates for freedom and human rights and a person who has lived it that's going to be on this panel. And I'd like to introduce each of them separately to you. Our guests today are Nathan Sharansky and Kang Kwa Hwan. And I'd like to have both of them come up to the stage at this time, and I'll do a more full introduction as they come up. Among the many guests received by President Bush, I can't think of any more important than our two guests today. They both met with the President recently as his statement and his work for freedom for individuals around the world. These two guests are survivors, as are those we recognize from the audience who have survived the regime in North Korea. In Nathan, we have someone who survived years in the gulag of Siberia, of the former Soviet Union. And in Kang, someone who at a much younger age, who was 10, I believe, when he entered the gulags in North Korea, is today also a survivor of a brutal system of gulags, this one in North Korea. I want to personally thank both of these heroes of mine for being here today and for never giving up on the fight for freedom. While they are now free, they continue to fight for those who are not free. The chains of those that are in bondage continue to rub against their skin, as it should continue to rub against ours. Because none of us are free until we're all free. None of us can truly live in that purity of freedom until we know that everybody lives in the pure air of freedom. So I ask you to each, as they come up to present, what I'm going to do here is ask for each of them to make a short set of comments, and then we're going to have a dialogue back and forth to welcome and to greet them. And first I would like to bring up Mr. Nathan Sharansky. Please give him a round of applause.
Well, thank you, dear Chairman, our dear friends, and dear friends. I just now was speaking here for half an hour, so I don't have too much to add. But as you remember, when I was speaking, I was all the time quoting one book, not my book, but this book, Aquariums of Pyongyang, because I really was surprised when I read it. It was so surprisingly how to see that different nations, different cultures, different histories, but the nature of fear, the mechanism of totalitarian regime is the same. To destroy the desire of people to be free, to control them by fear. But also the mechanism of resistance. The mechanism of getting rid of this tyranny is the same. And that's why I believe that it's so important that while speaking about the totalitarian regime of North Korea and seeing it as part of this empire of fear which still exists, which is shrinking, becoming smaller, but still exists in North Korea, in Cuba, in some countries in the Middle East, and some other places. And no doubt that we people of the free world, and especially people of the free world who knew what it is to live in fear society, we have unique experience, but also unique obligation to help to those who are still in this prison to get rid of this prison. And we are very glad that we have such good and strong friends in an American Congress and an American Senate, but it's very important that the leaders of the free world will hear our message, and we will make sure that policy of appeasement, policy of adjusting our world to the needs of dictators will be stopped, and that we will force dictators to adjust their policy to our ideal of freedom. Thank you.
That was good. Thank you, Nathan. I was always taught that when dealing with evil, you don't negotiate. You confront evil. It's not something that you negotiate with. I want to next bring up Kang Kwol-hwan. He is the author of The Aquariums of Pyongyang. And who would have thought, as a 9-year-old boy, that he would be sent to a North Korean gulag and to spend over 10 years there? He spent that in a concentration camp, but who also would have thought that after 10 years there and coming out and being able to leave and get out of North Korea, that he would then meet with the President of the United States and to be able to tell him about his experiences and the nature of the regime in Pyongyang. And so I ask you to give a hearty hero's welcome, a Joseph-type welcome, if you will, to Kang Kwol-hwan.
사실 최근에 저에게는 굉장히 놀라운 일들이 일어나고 있습니다. 제가 9살 때 그때는 정말 어린 노예에 불과했던 정치범이 그것을 탈출해서 또 자유세계에 와서 기자로 활동하면서 또 이제 대통령을 면담을 했습니다. 그래서 제가 탈북을 할 때 저희 가장 큰 소망은 함께 있었던 저희 친구들, 엄청나게 죽어나갔던 그 많은 사람들, 이 억울한 사람들의 그 목소리를 내고 싶었습니다. 10년 동안 저희 이 소망은 거의 이루어지지 않았습니다. 저희 동포라고 할 수 있는 우리 대한민국 정부가 3차례나 우리 동포들의 인권을 위원회에서 결의를 했는데 불참 기권을 했습니다. 이거는 진짜 제 개인적인 생각이지만 과거에 이완영이가 일제 나라를 팔아먹은 그 죄와 맞먹는다고 저는 생각을 합니다. 어떻게 저렇게 죽어나가는 사람들을 생각하는 국제사회의 염원을 그렇게 무시할 수 있는지 상당히 참담했습니다.
Many surprising things have happened in my life of late. Back when I was 9 years old, I was a slave boy. I was a political prisoner. And since then, I have escaped from the gulag and came to South Korea and became a reporter. And not too long ago, I had the honor of interviewing the President of the United States. However, when I had escaped from North Korea, I had a hope. My hope was that I would one day become the voice of those who have died out in the gulag, those people whose death I have witnessed. However, for many years, over 10 years, my hopes never came to fruition. In particular because there was no help from the South Korean government. This was about their people. This was about their brothers in North Korea. However, the South Korean government never did anything to help us. In particular, when the issue of North Korean human rights came up in the UN, for 3 times, South Korean government had refused to participate or to help. And personally, I think this was like the Lee Wan-yong who had sold South Korea, who had sold Korean Peninsula to the Imperial Japan, just like that.
저는 그 나탄 샤란스키가 쓴 이 책을 제가 오늘 본다고 해서 다 읽었습니다. 근데 제가 이 책을 보면서 가장 공감했던 그 말이 생각납니다. 공포 세계에 사는 사람들은 그 독재 정권과 싸우는 내면의 용기를 가져야 되고, 자유세계에 사는 사람들은 독재 국가를 바라보는 도덕적 분별력이 필요하다. 저는 참 이 말에 정말 동감을 합니다. 지금 오늘 우리 대한민국의 일부 사람들과 국제사회 일부 사람들은 김정일 정권의 정당한 비판 없이 무조건 도와주거나 화해하거나 뭐 이런 식의 논리로 북한을 대하게 되면 저절로 풀리는 것처럼 말을 하고 있습니다. 지난 8년 동안, 햇볕 정책 이후 8년 동안 북한 주민들의 삶은 더 나빠졌고 인권 상황은 최악으로 이루고 있습니다. 그리고 또 핵 문제까지 좀 개발이 됐는데 이 결과가 나와 있음에도 불구하고 아직까지도 그 정책이 옳다고 믿는 사람들이 있습니다. 이거는 도덕적으로 타락했다고 볼 수밖에 없습니다.
I have read the famous book by Mr. Sharansky, and in the book I share this line with you, that people who are living in the terror regimes, they must have braveness within their heart, and also those who live outside of the terror regime, they must have the ethical discernment to be able to tell one from the other. Now, I speak to the people of Korea and also people of the world that the appeasement alone is not enough when it comes to dealing with North Korea. The sunshine policy of South Korean government had gone on for 8 years, and during that 8 years, we see that the lives of the North Korean people have deteriorated, and also their human rights are being violated even more as of today. And also there's the issue of the nuclear warhead that's mushrooming over our head. Now these are the results of the 8 years of sunshine policy. We know that it has gone awry. I think it's time that we correct it.
저는 과거에 대한민국에서 민주화운동을 했던 분들이 지금도 똑같은 목소리로 민주화운동을 하고 있는 그런 분들을 존경합니다. 우리 김문수 의원님이나 또 수경수 목사님, 또 그리고 많은 분들 정말 존경하고요. 이런 분들이야말로 진정한 자유민주 투사라고 저는 생각을 합니다. 그리고 저와 같은 수용소에서 생활을 했던 우리 김영순 씨, 또 이제 김태진 씨가 이 자리에 와 있는 것 같은데요. 그분들 참 감사합니다. 그리고 북한 인권을 위해서 노력했던 많은 분들에게 감사 인사 드립니다.
I have utmost respect for the people who have worked and fought for the democracy in South Korea and who are continuing to do so in this new government of South Korea. That includes Mr. Kim Moon-soo, Assembly Member, and also Guk Young-chun, Reverend. And also there are many people who I know who have been fighting for the democracy of South Korea and who are continuing to do so in South Korea. And also there with us today are Kim Yong-sun and Kim Tae-jin, who had suffered together at the Gulag in North Korea with me. And thank you for all of you who are fighting for the human rights of North Korea.
Thank you. Thank you, Nechon. We're going to have a discussion here, and we'll just remain seated during this part of the program. If you have particular questions, I don't know if we're going to have time or a format to be able to do it, but you could write them down and try to catch one of the staff members from Freedom House or that's working on this to pass them up, and we'll see if we can get to some of them. What I'm going to do is ask questions of our two panelists and then see as much as we can to take place. Mr. Sharansky, I want to start with you if we could. You've seen this action before, and you, as I take it, recognize what the North Korean government is doing from what you saw the Soviet Union doing. When you were on the inside of the Soviet Union and you're in the Gulag, what were some of the most effective things that people did on the outside to advocate for change within that Soviet system?
Well, first of all, it must be clear, we Soviet dissidents would not survive even one day if there was not constant pressure of the free world, if our struggle was not also struggle of all the bigger world. And when I was in prison, I was in absolute isolation. I didn't know what's happening there in the outer world. But from the behavior of the KGB guys, from the secret police, from the fact that each time when I was close to death, they were retreating and were meeting our demands, me and other dissidents, was the best proof that they are under the pressure. And what this pressure meant that the leaders of the free world were linking their policy, their economical assistance, military assistance, trade agreements, loans, cultural agreements, everything were linking with the question of human rights. For us, the best day in prison was when we read in Soviet newspaper the article condemning President Reagan that he called Soviet Union evil empire. And why? It was the greatest day for us in prison. We were so excited knocking through the walls by Morse and communicating in other ways from one side to the other, telling that finally the leader of the free world called a spade, said the truth about Soviet regime. And it is very important to understand, the moment the free world, the leaders of the free world, start speaking with moral clarity, calling this dictatorships, terrorist regimes by name, or as President Reagan said, I am not interested. He told me, President Reagan, later, when I met him after I was released from prison, he told me, I am not interested to build friendship with the Soviet Union as long as the Soviet Union is a prison for its own citizens. When this is the policy of the free world, then we have a hope, and then we have a future.
Are we, the United States, I want to ask first, and then secondly, the broader world community, speaking with enough moral clarity regarding North Korea?
Well, I think not. First of all, as long as this regime exists, it means that we don't do it enough. Enough you will do when they will stop existing. But no doubt there are some very clear and strong voices, and there is a lot of appeasement, a lot of desire to find a way to make them less dangerous, to make them more friendly. Let's first talk about reunification, let's first talk about some security threats, and let's postpone our discussion of the question of human rights. And we can see the signs of appeasement from sometimes from the United States, often from Europe, and even from South Korea. We can see these signs of appeasement. And I think it's very important, that's why, to take a very strong moral position, understanding that this moral position also is the best for our own security.
And it's clearly the best for the North Korean people and human rights.
No doubt. That's what North Korean people need. Those who are saying that North Korean people like this regime, like to be in prison as our hero today, that's nonsense. That's racism to believe that there are people who like to be tortured.
Mr. Kang, you spent years in a North Korean gulag. Can you give to the audience a story that summarizes what your experience was like in that gulag system? Just a vignette, a brief story about what would describe what it was like living there.
저는 저희 그 할아버님이 이제 북한에서 정치범으로 이제 잡혀가면서 할아버님 때문에 이제 3대가 이제 수용소로 끌려갔습니다. 여덕 수용소는 2개의 그 구역으로 되어 있었는데 한쪽은 완전 통제구역이라고 되어 있는 한번 들어가면 영원히 못 나오는 구역이 있고 제가 있던 구역은 혁명화 구역이라고 하는 완전히 죽이지 않는 곳이었습니다. 그러니까 엄밀하게 말하면 진짜 죽이는 곳의 생활은 저는 모릅니다. 그러니까 우리가 경험했던 것보다 훨씬 더 열악한 상황이 있을 것이라고 저는 짐작을 하고 있습니다.
Well, I was sent to the political prison because my grandfather, in fact, was a political prisoner, and I was a third generation of my grandfather, so I was guilty by association. So at a young age, I was sent to the Yodok political prison. And this Yodok political prison, Yodok Gulag, is divided into 2 separate parts. One part is completely controlled, so there's no access in or out. And then the other part is called a revolutionary region. So this part was somewhat less controlled, and this was the part that I was in. Now, the people in the completely controlled area, I would assume their lives had been much worse than my experience had been, but I would not know, and I would not be able to tell about it. However, I was in the revolutionary region.
정치범 수용소라는 것은 김정일 정권이 두 가지로 아주 중요한 목적이 있습니다. 하나는 반대파들을 그냥 간단하게 처리하는 효과가 있고 그 사람들을 모아서 최소한의 식량을 제공해서 죽도록 일을 시키면서 죽는 순간까지 김정일 정권을 위해서 일하게 만드는 그 두 가지 효과가 있습니다. 그러니까 다른 동구권 국가가 다 무너졌지만 북한이 50년 동안 반세기 동안 세습을 하고 지금까지 정권을 유지하고 있는 것은 바로 그 수용소가 있기 때문에 저는 유지된다고 생각합니다.
Kim Jong-il uses his gulag for the following two purposes. The first purpose is to purge his oppositions, and the second purpose is to have these oppositions work for his regime. So Kim Jong-il would provide the list of food to the people in these gulags, and these people would be working for Kim Jong-il until their death. And because of the existence of such gulags, even though all the Eastern European countries have collapsed, North Korea is able to continue on with their own regime and also have a generation change in the dictatorship. And gulag serves that purpose.
그러니까 히틀러가 만들었던 그 아우슈비츠 수용소에서는 물론 이제 일을 시키는 사람들도 따로 있었고 필요 없는 사람들은 그냥 대량으로 가스실로 들이밀고 다 학살을 했습니다. 북한은 이제 정치범들을 가스실로 안내해서 죽이진 않지만 바로 그 굶주림과 강제노동으로 체계적인 학살을 해왔다고 저는 생각을 합니다. 그러니까 지난 반세기 동안 그 수용소가 유지가 되어 왔는데 대략 한 20-30만 명 정도의 정치범들이 반세기 동안 죽어나가고 들어오고 죽어나가고 그러니까 그 숫자는 헤아릴 수가 없습니다.
Hitler had his Auschwitz and he had his gas chambers for mass execution. No such gas chambers exist in the gulags of North Korea. However, there's the systematic starvation and forced labor that led to the death of many people. So this type of systematic execution in North Korea, I would say in the last half a century, about 200,000 to 300,000 people have been executed in such fashion.
그러니까 이 21세기 문명사회에 그 히틀러 나치 수용소 같은 그런 수용소 존재한다는 것 자체가 정말 인류의 수치이고 이런 것조차 해결하지 못하면서 무슨 자유와 인권을 말할 수 있는지 전 참 답답합니다. 그래서 이제야말로 국제사회가 이 수용소를 없애기 위해서 한 목소리를 낼 때가 됐다고 생각합니다.
Now we are at 21st century and we are still hearing and witnessing that such gulags as the one that had been run by Nazi Hitler exist in this world. And I think it's about time that the international community came together and had one voice and to talk about democracy and freedom. And to talk about such democracy and freedom without discussing such gulags as the one existing in North Korea would be ridiculous.
Mr. Kang, I want to ask you the same question I asked Mr. Sharansky. What would be the most effective things that we could advocate for to get change in North Korea for the people of North Korea?
지금 북한 정권은 그 핵을 이용해서 국제사회에 공갈을 하고 내부적으로는 주민들을 결속시키는 어떤 두 가지 효과를 바라고 있는데 국제사회가 핵에 자꾸 집중하다 보면 북한 체제를 변화시킬 수 있는 본질적인 문제에 접근할 수가 없습니다. 그게 바로 김정일 정권이 노리는 가장 큰 목적이라고 볼 수 있는데 국제사회가 핵도 핵이지만 핵보다 더 중요한 인권 문제를 모든 북한의 어떤 그 대북 지원이나 그 대화 채널에 그 조건을 건다면 분명 북한은 그 변화할 수밖에 없습니다. 그러니까 인권이 해결이 안 되면 모든 지원이 중지되고 국제적인 사회 압력이 가해질 수 있다는 그런 확신이 서면 북한도 변할 수 밖에 없다고 저는 생각을 합니다.
Well, the North Korean regime is using nuclear and the nuclear threat to blackmail the world, and also that brings about the solidifying of the people of North Korea. And if the world continues to focus on nuclear and nuclear issues only, I don't think we can actually get to the reality of changing the regime, changing the nature of the North Korean regime, I think we need to talk about human rights first and then nuclear later. If we were able to talk about and link the human rights of North Korea with the AIDS and other dialogues when it comes to North Korea, I think we could bring about changes in North Korea. And I think it's important for North Koreans to come to realize that all the aid and support would be suspended or stopped if there's no discussion of human rights. And once they come to realization of such, they would come to talks, and there would certainly be changes.
I want to ask the same question to Mr. Sharansky. Before I do, I want to note a couple of things. Number one, this is being broadcast live over Voice of America, and the timing was picked so that people in North Korea could listen to this. It's, I understand, maybe 1 in the morning or so, and it's one of those times when perhaps the guards are a little less on attention, and people can listen to this broadcast. So this is being live broadcast into North Korea. And the second one is I want to recognize Ambassador Mark Palmer that's sitting up front. Ambassador Palmer, would you stand up? This is a gentleman, if I could have him, who's advocated and has a bill moving through the House of moving us towards a series of policies that tolerate zero dictatorships around the world, if I could put it that way. And how many dictatorships are left in the world? 45 and counting down. 45 and counting down. There's still way too many. He was one of the bold advocates during the Reagan time of advocating for democracy throughout Eastern Europe in a very aggressive fashion. Again, you don't negotiate with evil, you confront. And you confront and deal with the problems, but you don't negotiate. Mr. Sharansky, what's the most effective things? You've mentioned about moral clarity from the rest of the world that we could do these days to advocate human rights changes inside North Korea.
Well, you know, when I had a meeting with President Bush and the President asked me, what is the one advice which you can give me to President? I told him, first of all, he put me in a very difficult station because I have many advices. He asked only one. But if to choose one, I said, speak to the dissidents. Make it clear that America is on the side of dissidents and not on the side of dictators. And by the way, I believe the fact that President of the United States of America in the last months was all the time making clear that America is on the side of people, whether in Iran, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Syria, in North Korea, is extremely important. It's extremely important. There will never be 1 million people demonstrating in Lebanon if it wasn't clear to them that America is on their side. There was never 4,000 judges in Egypt who sent a letter to Mubarak demanding change of elections if this change would not happen. I'm sure that the fact that Mr. Kang met with the president had direct influence, maybe even because of this, North Korea agreed on the meeting of 6, because they understood that now the emphasis is moving towards human rights, so better let's make sure that it will not be the situation. So this type of demonstration, not simply of solidarity, but the fact that dissidents, they are our partners and not dictators, something what is really changing the situation inside. I was speaking in my lecture before about double thinkers, and the most important thing is to encourage double thinkers to become dissidents. That is the way to do it. But that is the way to do it also if it is supported at the same time by clear policy in economical relations, in political and cultural. Helsinki Agreement was until now a unique example how big group of nations agreed to have a special code of relations where human rights will be connected and linked to all international policy. We still don't have such type of code or act about North Korea or about a number of other countries. And that's something what is very important to do.
Sir, those are good thoughts. Have we seen over the last 10 years what could be defined as a genocide within North Korea? Numbers that I've heard, up to 2 million people died of starvation or in gulags. That's nearly 1/10 of the North Korean population. Talk about a weapon of mass destruction. that would seem to be it.
Well, when I'm thinking about this starvation in North Korea, the closest what can come to my mind is the starvation of Ukrainians in Stalin's Russia, which was part of their policy when Stalin decided that he needs less Ukrainians in his empire, and he organized massive starvation. The fact that here it is the regime which hates its own people should not surprise it, because that's normal situation for dictators when feel themselves insecure and when feel that the people are becoming more and more critical towards this regime. No doubt, if you look what's happening with the starvation, what's happening with these awful camps, and I read this memoir, I heard some other things about this public capital punishments, killing of the people. And of course here we have to be very critical to ourselves and to the countries who in fact are assisting to this. When China is sending, I don't know how, more than 100,000 people probably were sent from China to North Korea, Koreans, under the pretext that they have their own demographic problems. China with 1 billion people has demographic problem to keep some tens of dozens or 50 or 100,000 Koreans, and they're sending them for death camps. So that is direct assistance to this policy of genocide, and it should be not only condemned, but the free world has to make it a very important point in all its relations with China.
Should we call it a genocide in North Korea?
Yes, we can. But it's not enough to call it. You have to treat it as a genocide.
That's a good point. Kang. Mr. Kang, there's been long a perspective that the North Korean people support the Kim regime, that they have been brainwashed, that they know nothing different, but that he provides everything for them. I want to read you a statement from a North Korean who has left the country. He's living outside the country. But he says this about the North Koreans' perspective of Kim Jong-il. All North Koreans, except for a few who lost their souls and those who can never be forgiven by the most generous people, do not look up to Kim Jong-il any longer. He's saying the North Korean people do not look up to Kim Jong-il any longer. Is that true?
그 말을 저도 같은 생각입니다. 그러니까 저도 이 책에서 제가 똑같은 어떤 동감을 얻을 수 있는 내용이 하나 있었는데요. 공포 체제에서 사는 사람들은 항상 그 이중적인 생활을 하고 있다. 그러니까 겉으로 표현하는 충성과 뒤에서 표현하는 진짜 본인의 모습. 이것은 공포로부터 그 사회가 해체가 돼서 안전함이 확인될 때에 비로소 인간들은 본인의 말을 할 수 있다는 말을 이 책에서 봤는데 그건 정확한 말이라고 생각합니다. 그러니까 북한 주민 대부분은 이 공포 때문에 이중적인 생활을 하고 있는데 겉으로 보기에는 모두 다 김정 체제에 순응하는 것 같지만 그 공포가 없어지면 저는 거의 김정일 빼고 거의 모든 주민들이 그 체제를 비판할 것이고 그 체제가 무너지는 것을 환영할 것입니다.
That is a true statement. I agree with that. From Mr. Sharansky's book, there is a passage where he talks about that people who are living under terror regime, they would be leading double lives. On the outside, they would show loyalty to the regime. However, on the inside, they would have their true feelings. However, these true feelings would be hidden until they feel that it is safe for them to become more honest. And when they are outside of such terroristic regime, then people become more honest. So as to the North Koreans, on the outside, it would seem that the North Korean people are all in obedience and worshipping Kim Jong-il. However, once the terror is lifted, I think except for Kim Jong-il, everybody else will be critical of Kim Jong-il.
What would be the most effective way that we could communicate with the North Korean people today? Different proposals have been floated of how to get information into a broad cross-section of North Korean people. How would you think would be most effective?
이미 북한은 중국과 어떤 동맹 관계에 있다고 하지만 지금 북한을 가장 위협하는 나라는 중국이라고 생각합니다. 그러니까 중국으로부터 자유의 어떤 바람이 계속 들어가겠는데, 예를 들면 한국의 드라마 테이프들이 비밀리에 북한에 들어가서 많은 북한 주민들을 어떤 생각을 바꿔놓고 있는데, 이것이야말로 우리가 북한 주민과 대화할 수 있는 한 채널이라고 생각을 합니다. 두 번째는 북한 언론은 다 이제 체제의 오형이기 때문에 이제는 거의 모든 북한 주민들이 북한의 어떤 선전 매체를 믿지 않습니다. 그러니까 이제 한국의 KBS 사회교육 방송이라든가 또 이 RFA 같은 이런 외부 세계 방송에 상당한 귀를 기울입니다. 그러니까 저는 여기에 좀 더 우리가 투자를 해서 체계적으로 방송을 한다면, 또 그리고 중국을 통해서 또 한우를 통해서 라디오를 계속 북한이 보내주면 저는 아주 가까운 시일에 많은 북한 주민과 대화할 수 있다고 저는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
There are quite a few ways of doing that. And first one would be through China, in fact. I know we on the outside hear of China as being an ally, a major ally of North Korea. However, I think China is also a major threat to North Korea because the wind of freedom comes through the border with China. For example, soap operas made in South Korea, they would be going to China first and then eventually find their ways to North Korea. So that would be one way of effective communication with people of North Korea. And the other one would be through broadcasting systems such as the KBS, Korean Broadcasting System, or the RFA, Radio Free Asia, because the people of North Korea have come to realization that the media used by the North Korean regime is contaminated, so they no longer trust the media of North Korea. They tend to rely on outside media more. So if we were to use these channels more effectively, I think we can communicate with them more effectively. And also another way would be for us to drop more radios in North Korea so that people would have a chance to hear this broadcasting more easily.
I want to make sure with my organizers here that where are we on time frame? How much time, or do we need to wrap up? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you have in front of you two of really the great heroes of our era. It always amazes me how out of a world of billions of people, a few come up to the surface and then become symbolic of a much greater group of people. Hundreds of thousands in the Korean Gulag and in the Soviet Gulag, maybe millions, I don't know, millions in the Soviet Gulag. And yet two names stand out in that group. Certainly Mr. Sharansky and Mr. Kang are two of those names that stand out, of individuals that have gone through the hardship, that have lived there, and now give voice to these death camps and what happened there, and remind the world not to let this continue to go on, to not let it continue. And I hope all of you, if you haven't read Aquariums of Pyongyang, that you will. And then once having read it, that you will not stop at that. It's not enough to declare something a genocide. Action must follow. It's not enough to declare a regime evil. Action must follow. And remember, it's our voices that will probably keep many people alive. And that's been true throughout history, whether it was in Mr. Sharansky's case or in others. It's the voice of those outside so that the government itself is fearful of killing its own people because of the repercussions around the world. And even a regime like Kim Jong-il's fears those repercussions. So become educated, learn, find out what these heroes of the era have said and have done, and become an advocate against this evil. Please join me in giving them a wonderful round of applause for what they stand for and do. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Kang. John, always good to join you.